Hello and welcome. My name's Charlie Bronx, and I have the privilege of chairing the Tech for Good Programming Board, and I'm also on the advisory board for the World Humanitarian Forum. My day job is working for Crown Agents Bank. We're an FX payment specialist specializing in frontier and emerging market currencies, where I work with strategic partnerships, marketing, communications, and with a background in humanitarian and international development work across all sectors. So the World Humanitarian Forum, or as we will call it here, the WHF, is the largest and most inclusive non-partisan forum in humanitarian aid and international development. And the WHF brings together decision makers and opinion formers in the public, private, and non-profit sectors, as well as the next generation of partnership builders. And through our convenings, we advance critical global discussions and transform conversations into action, as well as provide a powerful forum to catalyze collaboration through shared value approaches and social impact objectives. And we're delighted to be discussing the future for humanitarian sector with regards to AI for Good with our Tech for Good programming board formed of experts in their field. In responding to COVID, we must consider the role of artificial intelligence, from enabling mobile apps, which are able to respond to individuals facing sexual violence, to how it can help model disasters, assisting with humanitarian response. And the pandemic has highlighted our need for international cooperation. Global challenges cannot be addressed in silos. We must collaborate and find the common solutions if we're to solve the many issues that we're facing on an international scale. I've used the word humanitarian a few times, and we're looking to analyze and look at the redefinition of the word humanitarian. Is it being a better human? Is it improving the scope of the sector? And that's something that we're going to be touching on throughout World Humanitarian Forum talks. We're also looking to discuss and analyze the impacts of COVID-19 and the opportunity in the Global Reset Dialogue, shedding light on the World Humanitarian Forum 2021 and beyond. So without further delay, let me introduce you to some of our incredible Tech for Good programming board. I have, first of all, Ms. Alice Petrova, Managing Director of AI for Good. Give us a wave, Alice. And then Anne Rosenberg, Executive Sustainability Tech Advisor and co-founder of SDG Ambition. And Ms. Elizabeth Nroji, International ICT Operations Manager of Christian Aid. And Ms. Nicola Strong, Managing Director, Strong Enterprises and Senior Consultant at the Institute for Ethical AI, Oxford Brookes University. And when they talk, perhaps you'd be so kind as just do another sentence on yourselves so that people can get to know you a bit more, although full bios are available on the website. I'm going to start with some guiding questions, and then we'll incorporate those provided from the audience during registration. So my first question, which I'm going to aim at Alice, if I may, is to start the discussion off with a general question around the ways AI can be used to support the Sustainable Development Goals as we aim to build back better from COVID-19. In what ways can we harness technology for good, and where does AI stand in assisting with the Global Reset Dialogue? Over to you, Alice.
Thank you. So my name is Alice. Thank you very much for joining today. So my experience working in the humanitarian sector covers a lot of issues from domestic violence and sexual and reproductive health to obviously disaster management. I worked with refugees at an organization called TechFugees, Tech Community Response for the Needs of Refugees, and other types of human rights organizations. So I would suggest that, we start with this question by just analyzing this past year and what happened there. And obviously, COVID-19 did bring a lot of surprises. So we realized that a lot of things in our life were not working properly or not kind of built resilient for this pandemic or this crisis. So obviously we had to adapt really quickly. And to be honest, my experience working with a group of very inspiring individuals in our community, AI for Good community, is that we discovered in the first months of COVID, we discovered so many ideas and solutions being built already for, analyzing symptoms, analyzing knowledge around the problem, kind of developing vaccines. Obviously, we've seen an unprecedented way of discovering new vaccines, with AI help and obviously help of a lot of researchers working on this problem. So starting from, tackling this disease to all along the way to, improving our public health and the way it's provided to dealing with the other problems in the meantime. So obviously problems such as fake news, such as you name it, SDGs in terms of health and well-being in other areas. So obviously, like with COVID, a lot of attention was brought to that. But what about other diseases, especially like in developing countries, like malaria and measles and all this other kind of really important problems that we had to tackle. But in every field, in every kind of area of sustainable development goals that we touched, we can see that the use of data, the use of insights, the acceleration of how we deal with these problems in a global scale. Obviously, this is something that I think data and AI definitely helped us this year, and hopefully building back better together, with utilizing this technology would definitely something that I'm, at least in my organization, focused on. But I'm pretty sure the entire sector is here with me, and they would love to utilize this technology in the best possible way to accelerate, this building back together, and making sure that the crisis is not going to last for another 5 years, but actually maybe a year maximum. I really hope so, at least. I don't know about other speakers today.
Thank you. No, and I think we were talking previously, Alice, and I think you're mentioning about the forced adoption often of some of this technology during this crisis has been a fascinating part of that. And Elizabeth, have you seen the similar from your perspective?
Yes, I have seen. And I think one of the things that has been affected during this pandemic being the SDG number 4, that's the access to education. And this side of the continent, the global south, where we do not have access to internet, the gadgets and everything like that, that has led people not being able to access that. So how then can we be able to leverage AI so that we can be able to bring education to all? I think working from home and parents also becoming the teachers of today during this period. I don't know whether we are becoming better teachers than the teachers we have or worse teachers, but I think that's a subject for another day. But how do we make that education such that we do not have a curriculum for Kenya, a curriculum for Nigeria, a curriculum for UK, where we using the data available out there, then we can be able to leverage that and build education systems that can be able to meet the global at large. I think that will go so far in ensuring that our communities and our beneficiaries that we work with are able to be better and improve livelihoods. The other SDG I would like to touch on is on the climate action. I would say climate issues, or rather the global warming, those are the things that we are seeing even as we fight the pandemic. I think the world has come, it had a fresh breath of life when we all went into lockdown. But again, we're still struggling with so many things, floods, hurricanes, and all these things that are happening. How can we use AI in terms of using site imagery that are able to predict what is going to come and enhance our communities, build them better, that they are able to prepare for some of these calamities or rather disasters as they come. The other one I would say is on the partnership for goals. The world has never needed more partnership than today. With reduced funding, with reduced resources that are not available for everyone, how then do we leverage, work with each other, and know that I'm strong in X, I'm strong in AI, perhaps in chatbots, for instance, I'm strong in machine learning, I'm strong in neural networks, and somebody else is strong in something else. But how can we leverage all our expertise so that we are able to develop solutions that are going to help the economy build back better?
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's really insightful. And the build back better, obviously, that's wording that we're all quite familiar with now. And certainly, I think the partnership piece is really compelling. I'm going to move on now and bring in our other members, board members, with Anne and Nicola. And I think actually this will apply, and I think all of you will have a lot to say for this. One use of AI is in modeling potential disasters to assist with humanitarian operations and to decipher relevant hazard patterns, facilitate decision-making, improving resilience. What role can can the international AI standardization play in bolstering global disaster response in vulnerable countries? And I say that knowing that there are a lot of different measures and methods, and it's a very controversial subject. So if I may, shall I bring in Anne first? There we go. Oh, Anne, I think we've got mute bingo.
Yes. Yeah, so thanks, Charlie. So first of all, I have worked with technology for the last 21 years. And we are at a tipping point right now where standardization and how to apply AI and the ethic about it is super important. Going back to what Alicia and Elizabeth spoke about, even though we are in a very resilient, difficult time right now, we have been able to come through COVID in a way where we have taken technology and used technology for good. We have learned how to do really good public-private partnership. We are coming together as we never have come together before. And it is because the technology is at our hand and is so incredible. We can do so much with technology, more than we even understand and dream about. And that is the opportunity. And that's the reason why I don't look at technology. I look at technology for good. I look at AI for good. You can't do AI without not doing for good. So that's the first thing we need to think about when we apply AI or any of the other exponential technologies. But that also brings us into situations about the ethic. And there's a lot of conversation going on right now if there should be a goal number 18, because when you have something at hand, like we have with AI, where there's so many opportunities and so many great things we can do in part of the world and in situations that we never really been able to support in the way we can do it today by using AI for good, we also need to bring in the whole conversation understanding about standardization and how we use the standards around it. And there is a lot of great scorecards and standards, but I think when you build a standard, you need now to look at not just from a lens from an efficiency, but a lens from how do we apply it in the right ethic kind of way with a conscious mindset. And that's what I think will be the next big thing, which is a normally natural evolution, what we are in right now, which is also a great opportunity. And by that, I would like to hand over to you, Nicola, because I know you have a lot of opinion around this, right, Charlie? Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. Nicola, if you be kind.
Hello, so I'm Nicola Strong, and I'm really curious about ethical AI. I'm curious about how the corporate inquiry explores AI, and also how you do immersive learning. So that's my curiosity. And of course, how it applies to this particular scenario. To answer the question, I think I'm delighted that we are looking at different standards. I am pleased that there are a number of organizations exploring this. I think the sooner that we arrive at a place where there is one that we can all unify with, and I know there's work being done on that. So in many ways, I'm looking forward to that. And when that is in place, when we have a unified idea about what an international standardization is for AI, then I think it will help all of the stakeholders, particularly if you're in a disaster response in a vulnerable country. And I think what it will do, if we are collecting data now, then what it will do, it'll give us I suppose an understanding of the patterns of the data sets, of the data lakes, of the information, the language, the cultures, the sort of information we need when it's broken, because of course when a disaster happens we lose data. So in many ways people need to be able to have a common language of actions to be able to respond to that. And I think in organizing, then it's much easier to make decisions faster if you have that information. And I think there's some brilliant work being done to capture all types of data in all different ways, from obviously the satellite data that we collect through to sort of on the ground day-to-day information. And I think the other thing that a standard, an international standard, will bring is a sense of being able to galvanize the sort of cultural transition that we'd need to make to bring the solution into play and to make it sustainable. So I think that would be my answer to the question.
Thank you, Nicola. And this is going to put you all on the spot, actually. How difficult do you think achieving that wonderful nirvana would be, to be able to get that agreed framework? Because we can talk about stuff, you know, we all have these great ideas, but how difficult do you think it will be to actually bring that together?
If I start, when I created the SDG ambition, which is a standard together with UN Global Compact, my recommendation is that when you define a standard, first of all, you should look at what, to Nicola's point, you should look at existing standard, which is in the market, but of course, so much great work have already been done. And then you need to do first a generic kind of standardization, where you take into consideration the different geographical part of the world. You take governments, you take, I mean, if you look at UN and UN Global Compact, this is what they're doing so uniquely. They really put it together from a government, from a civil society, and for a corporate world. Then you will sit with a generic framework. But when you build a standard, when we did the SDG ambition with UN Global Compact, we had the 10 principles, which is all about the ethic. So when you build a standard, you need to, like, on the side, have the ethic with you when you build a standard, so it doesn't be built in isolations. When you then have the standard, you then need to begin to do it for industries and also geographically. So that would be my input to give on that.
Thank you. So, Nicola, sorry, would you like to add anything there?
Yes, I was just thinking, I mean, I've been experimenting with some brilliant minds. I'm sort of very excited by the work they're doing. AI can do a lot for us here in taking vast amounts of information and assimilating it in a way that would be useful to us. I'm wondering whether we ought to sort of look at how an algorithm can, a non-bias algorithm that could actually, moral, with ethical bits that could actually explore that for us.
Yeah.
Thank you. This moves on well to how AI relies on representative data. However, one issue regarding the algorithmic bias problem, in which data used is not representative of all groups that it applies to, specifically keeping in mind ethnic minorities and the geographic splits. What are the potential solutions to this issue? I think you've already touched on that with that comment, Nicola. And how should organizations keep this in mind when implementing AI solutions? Elizabeth, would you like to tackle this one first?
On question 4.
This is question 3. This is the AI relies on, I don't know if you can hear me okay.
Yes. All right. This is on the data that we have out there that is, it comes from various groups, various countries, various backgrounds, even in different countries. We have it in various cultures and different age groups that could be there. How then, as people who are developing AI, how then do we own this data? Can we go out there and get definitive data that you can be able to own? It's okay, yes, to begin somewhere by using what is exactly out there, but again, as you get that data, can you delve deeper and start collecting more of what you could see that is missing so that you can close in the gaps? The other thing I think I would say also, having a diverse team. Sometimes I pick for an example for an IT group, an IT team group. Sometimes even when you are developing just the normal basic applications, we develop with the mindset of the ICT person. But when it goes out to the user, it's a different thing altogether. So the same even in AI, let's also have a diverse group. So if you're saying the bias is on the minorities, the marginalized people, age groups, race, and all these things, how then do we ensure that whether the people who are responding maybe to your questionnaires or the people you want to sample are from all those age groups, then you can be able to close in the gap on the data bias, or rather reduce the bias along those lines.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's a great answer. And then shall I move to Anne next?
I just want to echo Elizabeth, and I think it goes back to the thing about when we look at the evolution of technology. If I have mentioned before, I've worked in technology for the last 21 years, and when I see it's always like we get amazed by what technology can do, and then we adapt it. In the beginning, it's very much like an experimental thing we're doing, and I think there's been a lot of experiment around AI. And then you bring into the next phase where you get the ethic right, and then you get the normalization right, and then you really get the scaled into the way we live and work, and so on and so forth. And to Elizabeth's point, it's super important that the data that is being embedded into the personas is really well represented. I remember in the beginning with AI, there was a lot of conversation about the people who were still sitting and doing the experiment was very much from one certain part of the world and one certain type of nationality, and it didn't really represent. So I think this, where we kind of go, I call it like the phase 1 to phase 2, like the maturity of using AI into normalization. This is where we need to make sure that it really represent who the human being are of the world. So I totally agree with Elizabeth on this part, and that is the opportunity that we have. Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. And Nicola, is there anything you'd like to add to that one?
Unmute. Yes, I would. I think the thing that's really exciting for me is that this question is so important about collecting data that is valuable, but at the same time we are needing to honor the privacy issues. So there's collecting all of this amazing data about all the individual things about who we are, our authentic selves, and at the same time seeking to honor how we protect people's privacy, protect people's dignity. And I think, of course, obviously, ethics comes into this, and Anne's already talked about ethics in many ways. Of course, there are 100 or so ethical frameworks as well, which will also need to be in some way channeled and funneled into one particular ethical format that we can all work with. To answer the question, I think the obvious answer, as Elizabeth alluded to, is to look at creating the opportunity to build on what we've got. I'll be interested to hear what the audience thinks on this, actually. But also to perhaps temper what we've collected historically. While what we've collected data-wise is useful, it is in fact oppressive. There is too much data on too few people. And I think there's that lovely phrase, I think it's called the weird phrase, where so many papers, research papers, are based on other students who've been around to respond to the research. So we've got a very, very detailed understanding of students in universities. And what we need to do is broaden that out. And I think there's some amazing people out there doing that now. And I'd like them to start networking more with each other so that we can actually build these data lakes that are far more respectful across all communities. I think another obvious answer is to really listen to the silent, the ones that are not choosing to speak. I think there are a lot of people out there, and unfortunately they're silent in many ways, not out of choice. They don't have access to technology. So we're moving into that capacity issue. How do we make things more accessible so people can actually share their data? And I think the other thing that I'd like to offer is the idea of what data metrics we're collecting. And I think we do have a very narrow idea of what's useful. I think we're being taught very clearly now with the recent events what areas we really need to include that have been ignored. I think there's another few layers behind that that are not even thought of. So looking at how we expand our data metrics and our data variables, I think is going to be really important over the next few years. And I think that means we can honor far more people in a respectful and dignified way.
I really like the language you're using around that, Nicola, and I think that brings me really on to the next question, which I'm going to focus with Alice and Elizabeth on. While we speak about possibilities brought by AI, many small organizations and entities will have difficulty in implementing these potential solutions. What do AI implementers need to keep in mind with what is possible for small and medium-sized organizations? And that will apply to all geographies, bringing different challenges. So if I start with Alice first.
Sure. So we do work with a lot of smaller organizations. like charities, NGOs around the world, that are not necessarily kind of like in a position where they can choose from the provider, right? So it's kind of like a luxury to them. So what is really important, and we do this work every time we kind of start the engagement, it's like to understand for them whether they need this technology and whether they can actually achieve a lot with it, because sometimes, what AI offers is obviously like, scale, in some ways, like you make, your operations, day-to-day operations more efficient, you solve some problems through like, better insights and learning, and you improve your practice, which is all great things. But sometimes when your organization is solely focused on one pressing need, and it wouldn't necessarily kind of like have a huge benefit from using AI. We just need to admit it to ourselves and be very kind of open and transparent about it. So this is what we do. We usually run a workshop with this type of organization. And by the end of this workshop, we will just say, hey guys, you actually don't need AI. To start with, you just need to collect better data, and analyze it with some data scientists in your team. Or perhaps even like, use some open source technologies, which are usually quite affordable. And it's just because charities, specifically, small organizations, they don't really have, technologists working for them in house. It's hard for them to assess which technology is more affordable to them and perhaps more fit for purpose, I would say, in their particular use case. And because open source technology usually also has quite a long documentation, which is not designed for humanitarians. So for people working in those organizations, it becomes like a burden, to read these piles of text and try to understand the code behind it, try to implement it in their organization. Then, they spend so much time, it doesn't kind of like yield any great results for them. So they're like this is a huge risk, and to invest in something more expensive, more kind of tailored, so why should we even be bothered, right? So they have like really failed experiences. And for us, what we do, we obviously bring them on a journey. So at first it's definitely like understanding whether they need this technology, collecting the data, trying to start with something very, very small, like a pilot project. See if it works, if it actually makes a difference for the end users, for the beneficiaries. If it doesn't, what's the point, right? And then you kind of like maybe apply AI once you are totally sure that yes, it will help me scale my impact and accelerate, the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Thank you, Alice. That's really helpful. Elizabeth, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think echoing Alice's discussion or other points on being clear on what the problem you're solving, that's a very critical component as a small and medium enterprise person. It could be, yes, you want efficiency and that's where you would like to start. By being clear that exactly the problem you want to solve at that particular point within your organization is very critical. The other thing is who are your user personas? Who are going to use this specific? Is it just internally, or will you be having other external, probably customers or people like that can be able to use that? So even as we go out there to our beneficiaries, which beneficiaries are we targeting in this kind of solution or other AI solution that we are thinking about? I think the other one I would also echo Alice is on being agile. It's very good to be deliberate. Let's start small, then we can be able to scale. Probably, as Alice has said, it could be just the data collection, and then from there you can be able to scale that to the next level. It could be just you need a tool to collect data and analyze, and then after that you can be able to put that into better use. Then what resources do you have internally within your organization? I think we have AI requires this kind of data scientists that are very expensive right now. But what kind of resource do you have? Probably somebody like Elizabeth, who by now is using a no-code tool. I really do not like programming, but by the use of the no-code tool, I'm able now to build a chatbot, and I've become a pro in that. Is that something that you can be able to leverage as you develop the natural language processing for that case? So within your organization, it's good to know what your skills are so that you do not invest so much into into adopting AI, just to mean that yes, you are small, you are a small medium enterprise, but again, you still can be able to use AI if you start small. Then I think also on the design of the specific solution that you want, considering that will cut in various geographies where some of the internet connection or other gadgets are considered. Are you going to look at a solution that is going to even go and use USSD, that is an SMS that can be able to reach to the very poor of the poorest who have a very basic phone, and they can be able to still use the information or rather leverage AI? Over to you, Charlie.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That is such a good answer. And actually, she's beautifully segued us into some normal next questions, talking about the normally artificial intelligence being closely related to online activities. And one of the questions we've got from the audience is, how effective is the approach to gather information, especially from Africa, when they don't have access to useful gadgets for them to access apps and internet? Now, I think it depends on which country we're talking about, but I think there is sometimes there's a paucity of equipment, as you were talking about, perhaps not smartphones, perhaps there's a basic phone. So that one particularly, Elizabeth, I think, is there anything you'd like to add to what you've just said in terms of how effective that approach can be if you don't have access? What are the sort of methods and ways of working around that?
I think the other thing, as AI implementers, we need to think about how can we make some of these solutions offline, such that I may not have connectivity, for instance, today, but probably I can be able to afford some data bundles, maybe at the end of the month, and I can be able to download a certain set of data set or other solution that I can be able to use that will be helpful probably for me and my family, or rather for my community. That's one way. In terms of the gadget, I think what I have seen, access to gadgets, I have seen, like, I think in Ethiopia, we have people who are recycling mobile phones. So producing very basic, let me call it, yes, it's basic phone, but I think it can be able to access internet. So meaning even at that level, the gadgets themselves are cheaper and accessible to most of those people who may not have that kind of thing. And I think on the other thing, in terms of the internet connection, how do we leverage? I think the telcos have really not been doing enough to ensure that we are getting connectivity reaching the hard to reach areas, or rather the minorities. I think they haven't, even when they do their CSR, I wouldn't say that the CSR is so good, but we need to bring the access to internet and even the cost of the broadband to a very accessible level in the very hard to reach areas. So which calls for more partnership, public, private, and that kind of thing, to be able to ensure that we have that kind of access.
That's brilliant. Thank you. The next question we've got from the audience are, what are the most encouraging trends that we're seeing at the moment? If I start with Alice, could you take this one?
So I can definitely flag a few to start this kind of like a round of questions and answers. The first one is like data for good. So we see a lot of activities there. So people started like collaborating all around the world in different parts. Specifically, you know, COVID was the impetus, I think. So for example, we've seen like an initiative from Facebook about, you know, movement data that they open source now, and you can use it for development of any type of modeling, for example, of, you know, pandemic and how it spreads, or other kind of like logistical kind of tools. Another thing is obviously data for COVID in general. When it started, there was like a huge initiative by a lot of organizations, including Kaggle, which is the, you know, famous data science platform for people that work in the sector. And they released like a lot of data sets. Also like other kind of research organizations, academia, like released a lot of like public data sets about SARS, which helped us to get where we are right now in terms of battling this disease. But also like another interesting thing is collaboration. And I would suggest that it's not just you know, public to private organizations, or like, you know, humanitarian bodies with some corporate organizations, but also like people in general, kind of like even individuals, you know, there's like this amazing protein folding project called Folding at Home, where people just, you know, use the resources of their, you know, device, which is, you know, could be a laptop or anything, just to support this huge computing project that takes a lot of power. Like, and my final thing would be the academia that obviously helps, you know, humanitarian sector to catch up. So the fact that every single, you know, university now offers their skills. So, you know, we mentioned that data scientists, for example, are super expensive these days. So to make them more affordable, you can actually go to, you know, research organization, academia, like in university in your area, and just partner with them on a specific project. And especially if you have some data to share with them, if you have some knowledge about the problem, because what they need is like literally like data and subject matter expertise. Like, it's so easy to partner with them these days, and just like, you know, to get any project off the ground and to start kind of like making impact and changing people's lives through this type of partnership. So I really love what academia has been doing in the past couple of years in that field.
That's great. And thank you. Anne, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Because I know that you're seeing a lot in the private sector as well.
Yeah, actually 3 points I want to add. First of all, I agree with Alicia. When I was working at SAP, I was overseeing 3,800 universities, and the amount of skills and resources and mindsets at the universities, and bring that together with corporations, because the corporations have the data set. It's just an opportunity, and you also touched on this, Nicola. The universities around the world have so much great minds, and they really just want to go out and work on real things. So I think for all the audience out there, if you haven't done a maths make yet with an university, definitely go out and do it. And then I want to touch on the thing about data. I mean, I think COVID have shown everybody in the world that every single human being are right now daily checking data on COVID. We live on data. We survive on data. We get depressed by the data. We get happy based on the data. Every day, every single person in the world are looking at the COVID situation. And it's fact. And I think what it have shown, both the private sector, but also the civil society and government, is that whatever we speak about climate, whatever we speak about, it's all based on facts and data. So it's never been more important. And then the last point I want to mention about it, so I'm a science fiction writer, and it's kind of interesting how science fiction, that mindset is important now to build back better. But what is so important, we don't want to do horrifying science fiction scenarios, and then we want to do beautiful science fiction scenarios. So when we speak about AI, we need to speak about the good of AI, technology for good. And this is the obligation, I think, when we speak about the ethic, that when you work with technology, when you work with exponential technology, work with AI, always build something that is good for humanity. That is rule number one. Otherwise, you shouldn't build it. Stop building, right? And I think it has to do with us as human beings and companies, that we think about technology for that. Yeah, thanks.
Could I just add?
Please.
I think that's a fabulous thing to say. The other thing that I'd like to add in terms of trends is I'm really excited by the number of young people who are getting in contact with me and saying, I want to learn more, I want to code, I want to understand how I can find a way of using AI to solve this problem. And I think that energy is fantastic. So I'd just like to acknowledge the trend of enthusiasm to learn that's already out there. So if you have an issue, a local issue, I would wonder whether there is somebody locally who's already trying to solve it and may well be able to help you out.
Thank you, Nicola. That's a really good point, actually. Elizabeth, is there anything else you'd like to add to that point?
I think adding to that, there's an organization called Omedna that is running a couple of challenges, bringing together either data scientists, whether you are a beginner or whether you would like to learn. They are solving so many challenges. So it would be something to do with maybe use of solars or power in a certain country, or in COVID or whatever. So it bringing together so many people that are enthusiastic about AI, and out of that they are able to build solutions that are able to help the better good. But I think the other trend that I have seen is the use of chatbots, and I think that's the reason why I'm even building one for our organization and one for the NetHope Africa chapter. There is quite an adoption of the chatbots right now. And it also began even with the Who chatbot that we have had on WhatsApp, that is able to relay and dispel the myths, or rather the miscommunication around the COVID. And this came from one of the organizations called Priket in South Africa. And they did put out their solution out there for people to be able to use. All that you need to go and do is go talk to your Ministry of Health, for instance, and get the go ahead. Once you have that, then you can be able to use your solution, and you can track, you can put your questions, or rather the information that you'd like to disseminate regarding COVID right now, but even goes beyond COVID and has something to do with pregnant women and teenage girls and things like that. So chatbots, I would say chatbots is one of them. And the fact that there is also the no-code tools that are coming up, that is also helping in building the very easy chatbot that we are having.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's really helpful. There's a lot to think about there. And I think Alice has very kindly put the link on the chat there for everybody to see. And this one, I think I'm going to aim it in terms of, probably everybody can answer this one, but this is how do you see AI helping with logistics in emergencies? And if I can start with Alice on this.
Yeah, so obviously I can talk a lot about this topic, to be honest, which is like probably one of my favorite ones. I really love kind of like the response to disasters and how AI accelerates this area specifically. I would suggest that we start maybe with a few kind of like, I would say details. So the data that you might use for it is definitely like satellite imagery, it's geospatial data. We were talking about it in our internal sessions, like both geospatial and satellite imagery becomes a little bit more expensive when you want to kind of like dig down and like find something very, very small. But apart from that, you know, for disaster management, I think there are a few kind of initiatives run by UN, including UNITAR and another kind of agency that provides us data for free. So you can obviously like, you know, send a request or even like just access it for free. In case of like social media communications, it could be a lot, you know, messier in terms of what data you get there, but still in terms of, you know, warnings and spotting the disaster early enough definitely helps to kind of like predict any sort of big weather event and stuff like that. Just observing, you know, the social space and what's happening there. Obviously weather data as we know it, which is widely accessible all over the world again. And in terms of solutions themselves, so I've seen a lot of stuff around like logistics coming from the food aid or like food delivery. So this space is being super busy right now in terms of how solutions have been developed for efficiency, for, you know, safety. So like how safely deliver things and aid specifically to areas that are remote, that are hard to access, that might be impacted by the disaster itself. You know, conflict zones, how to kind of like deliver aid in these areas. Obviously there are like, you know, a lot of hardware tools that you have to connect to it and human power, but without it, I think it's impossible to do. In any case, my favorite probably in terms of disaster management is also not just delivery and logistics, but also how you kind of like warn people beforehand. And obviously, you know, talking about, you know, ages ago when we had, you know, Syrian war really unfolding. I've seen how very simple kind of like warning system through, text messages, again, talking about accessibility, was set up. And it wasn't even AI, to be honest. It wasn't anything to do with AI. It was just like, quick spread of information, but it did save a lot of lives. So yeah, going back to that, I can only imagine how much more efficient and effective we can be with AI and analyzing insights and analyzing social media data and other types of data that I named before. So yeah, I would like to pass it on to the next speaker.
I think, Anne, is there anything you'd like to add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, looking at it from the technology side, I think this is a whole new area that we have only seen the beginning. Is going to involve, as Alicia just spoke so beautiful about, we speak about more efficient logistic processes. We talk about better infrastructures. We speak about new way of doing communication. So we are changing the whole way we normally communicate, the normal way we operate. And I think this is where I don't know, I write a lot, and I always go back and look at history kind of repeat itself. And it's like that we're going into a new time where we thought technology was here only to do certain things. But I see the next era of technology now, and we've seen these pieces with COVID, what technology has been able to do for us, and we will now go in and use it in full blown technology for good. So I'm super excited about this. But back to our earlier conversation, we need so many great ideas, so many ideas and minds, and what Elizabeth talked about. I mean, it is equally all over the world, because every piece of the world is different geographical, different needs, different situations. So we need all voices to build better infrastructure, logistic processes, communications, and so on, to build, I would say the one word, to build a resilient world where we are much better prepared before it happened, right? We need to be prepared before it hit us. And that is what you can do with technology. Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. And Nicola, would you like to add anything?
I think I suppose I'm really interested in what you've just said around preparing. I think there's some very exciting stuff that is being designed to help staff understand scenarios, so running simulations, running particular types of scenario in order that they can be prepared. And you can get really quite detailed with that, and you can use immersive worlds, virtual reality and augmented reality to explore that safely. And I think that, for me, I think helps a lot of people, certainly when they're hit with the actual enormity of what's happened, whether it be in a disaster or whether it's something more uncomfortable like an armed conflict.
Thank you. And that brings me on to the next point, actually. And Anne, if I address this to you in the first instance, how we balance AI opportunities and risks with the need to ensure protection of civilians in an armed conflict, for example, scenario, because there are decisions that need to be made there, and that's a challenging question.
Yeah. So it was. Yeah. So I mean, this is super complicated, and I just want to touch what Nicola just said to this question here, is that it's interesting to see how resilience and scenario planning and science fiction is becoming a normality where we begin to build back better. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a whole shift happening now in the world. I think we went from a world where we were thinking very linearly about when we were doing things. We just did a little bit better than we did yesterday. But now we need to do it so much different because we don't know what's going to hit us. And so I think it would be normal now that we are going to build solutions and engagements based on resilient mindsets because we don't know what's going to hit us. So I just wanted to I was inspired when Nicola was speaking about the scenarios, all about scenario planning is going to be key. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's a really good point. I think if I jump to, we've had a few questions coming in, so I'm just going to tackle the next one, which is, which I'm going to aim at Alice in the first instance, which is social media artificial intelligence has been exploited to manipulate votes in developing countries, as well as the US and the UK, to name a few. Will AI amplify the dangers of morally dubious business models such as those of Facebook and Twitter? That's a question come in. I think they're anonymous, so it's a good question, and it's something that's come up in the news quite a lot recently in terms of the manipulation of data, and it's something that we're all probably quite nervous of, especially when we're maybe with an organisation reporting to shareholders and thinking about the stakeholders involved and how reliable is that data and how do you qualify that data. What's your view on that one, Alice?
So I would say let's be honest about it and just admit to ourselves that yes, AI and probably even less sophisticated algorithms did play a huge role, not only in the US and UK, referendums or elections, but also like, in productions of fake news, like recently deep fakes is becoming a big thing, in social media especially. And kind of like, it does amplify it because it gives us the capability to quickly generate, whatever we want, whatever kind of news, fake information, and then just spread it exponentially. Like it grew from, an ability of having just, an army of trolls. Now you can have a bot or like a number of bots and, just thousands of messages generated at a second. So obviously it did play a role, but I think the root cause is specifically with this type of scandals that we heard are not AI or technology or how we achieve that, but it's mostly about the fact that the business model is just not designed to do good. So when we again look back at the investment and the all investment kind of initiatives and how financial markets have been working, maximizing profit and constantly thinking about it. I mean, Facebook, when it started, they didn't want to be that evil corporate giants, but look, 10 years later, they are kind of like the whole embodiment of this. So and I don't want to kind of like make excuses for companies like this. No, I think they are in charge and they are to hold account for this. And what I really don't like is the fact that they created monopolies. So they created like a simple product that we all, based on our social behavior, we all want to use it, right? We all kind of like very egocentric, social animals. We want to socialize and, show off a little bit here and there. It's totally normal that, we've fallen to, or let them, fool us, I would say, to fall into this trap. And like now they generate massive amounts of data. They know so much about it, about us, about, what we want next. They can predict, and basically read our minds. In the next hour, they can say, you're going to watch Netflix because, I just showed you that ad. So it's crazy. It's crazy how, the manipulation became their source of power and control. And obviously the fact that, for example, if we look back a little bit and we look at, banks, that we also kind of, delivered power to because we trusted them with our finances, they became more and more regulated. And like over time, we see how, they're being held to account. So why don't we do the same thing for companies such as, social media providers like Facebook, Twitter, and others? So I just think that, regulations should catch up. Our understanding of how they work and what they use from our conversations, from our engagement to manipulate us, it will all kind of like naturally evolve, and we'll be more careful on how we use it. And perhaps something else new and shiny will appear out there. So we all move from Facebook to something else. Indeed, and it's already happening. It's already happening. So
thank you. There's a lot of food for thought there with Alice. And I think one of the things that you said about that manipulation and them anticipating, how do we know that we're really thinking that? How do we know that that's not been a planted seed from before? And is that affecting our decision making? And I've had a long conversation with Anne on this in terms of, with corporations and how people now are voting with their feet, and they're voting for organizations that have a social conscience in a way they didn't 20 years ago. Is that us making that decision, or are we being manipulated to make that decision. And there's all these wonderful, and you can tie yourself up in knots. And I think tech for good is becoming mainstream. It's part of an expectation, a demand from us as consumers, really, when we're making decisions. We vote with our feet, but are they our feet? And I guess that's Anne, are they our feet?
No, but it is super, super interesting. And what is the advice you can give to every single person in the world? I think, and I also think that is what this COVID time have learned us, because I think every single person have reflected a lot about their life and their values. And I think even though we are much more than ever now on social, because that's how we connect with people sitting isolated, of course, because of COVID, I think the conscious mindset, conscious leadership, that, we need to look at our values, our belief, who we are as human being. What do we engage into? Do we get manipulated? Probably we do sometimes, right? But I somehow think maybe our surroundings, maybe, our nearest family, friends, make sure we are grounded. Like, don't maybe begin to talk of something you never talked about this before, right? The sanity check about us as people. But I think a lot of people today are beginning, the meditation, conscious reflection, values, who we are. But again, I think this is an open question.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's it's great, and it's a really good point. Now, I'm aware we only have a few minutes left, so I'm actually going to invite each of the panelists now just to sum up their thoughts and what they want to leave really the audience thinking about. And I'm going to go in order of my screen, if that's okay, and start with Elizabeth and ask Elizabeth just to give us a few thoughts from her in a really interesting role with Christian Aid, and your passion and thought as a very valued Tech for Good programming board member.
Thank you so much. Having this conversation today opens up, or rather tells us there's so much that we can be able to leverage from AI in itself, and even beyond AI, technology in itself. Technology has become our lifeline as we live. We cannot either eat, breathe, drink, and especially during this time of COVID, without technology. So how then do we ensure that the digital infrastructure that captures both the access, the digital skills in themselves, and also the gadget are accessible to everyone else as we go on? How then do we ensure that we pass on this information? And this is for on the AI. I've realized, even as I interact with my fellow IT professionals from Africa, from the global South, the AI component is still such a very complex topic to discuss. And how then, as a Tech for Good board, and how else do we take, or rather break down this information, break down AI, break down those complex neural networks? When you think about neural networks, for instance, you think it is that kind very tech thing that nobody is able to understand and everybody seems to shy away. So I think my message today is, let's go out there. Let's teach the AI for good. Let's teach the technology for good. But let's make this information accessible to those who may need it and may find it useful. As Nicola said, there's a lot of enthusiasm of people who are wanting to learn. So how then do we even create like programs, or it can be a webinar, but it can be a program that brings together people who are interested to learn AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's amazing. Nicola, can I go to you next, just to sum up?
Yes. Everything that Elizabeth said, for starters, and particularly seek out that local coder. I think it's celebrating success. I think there's so much been done so far. I am inclined to want to check what has been done. A lot of hard work. And I think the thing that's really struck me as I've been researching this topic is listening to the silent voice. So that sense of building capacity, and I'm sure there's things that we can all do towards that, connecting everybody up. And I suppose as well, in spite of all of these sort of problems around where things are not necessarily good, that we continue to build with hope, that we continue to use our intuition know when it is good, know when tech is for good, and that we build it with that positive intention and with hope.
Thank you, Nicola. And Anne, if I may come to you next.
First of all, I'm excited to be part of the Tech for Good at the World Humanitarian Forum, and it's so timely because I really see that there's a shift from technology to technology for good. That is a shift that I see 2021. You can't speak about technology without speak about technology for good, and we are going to advocate for this globally. And then I think that the whole thing about unite, which I also think the World Humanitarian Forum is all about. I can see it in the board, I can see it across the other boards, that it's a mix of, governments, UN, civil society, startups, NGOs, and the private sector and academia. That just show that technology for goods and a strong united public-private partnership in an international setting, that's what we need to be able to come up with the solutions to build back better. So I'm super, super excited about this and what we're going to achieve together.
Thank you, Anne. That was a great summary. And that moves me to Alice.
Yeah, I'll try to be short, but I have a few points. So first of all, I'd like to say, don't be scared of AI. It's not artificial general intelligence we're talking about. It's not, a robot that is going to replace humans and, own our planet and, the world. It's not anything like that in the next, couple of decades for sure, but I'm pretty sure, even my generation wouldn't see, the rise of machines. So I'm very pro using AI in humanitarian sector. And I completely agree with what Anne said before, it's just like such an expensive, sometimes unnecessary, expensive technology. It could be gimmicky. It could be, very data greedy. You don't have the data, so why? It could be very energy greedy. So kind of sustainability is a big factor as well to consider, right? So let's be cautious about it. Let's probably, start by using it for good and then, making some profit later when we are certain that it's not making any damage. In general, I would suggest that it requires a cultural shift, like any new thing in this world, even if you think at public health, going back to Hispanic flu, in the beginning of last century, the way it changed the entire public health area, we are still catching up with it. Can you imagine, like 100 years later, we're still catching up. So it's going to be the same with AI. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be, a year for many organizations to join us on the journey. And I'm totally happy with that. I'm happy to, work with a lot of organizations in that area to just show them the possibilities, and to bring them on that journey with me. And I'm happy that, I've seen some really good use cases of AI applications in the humanitarian sector, international development sector as well. And I would suggest that, let's shed the light on these cases. Let's make more, good use cases for using AI for social good, so that, all that negative side of things, with scandals around Facebook, election fraud and stuff like that, are not the ones forming the public opinion about this technology. Because in that case, there will be like a misuse case of AI.
No, thank you, Alice. That's a great summary, and it just leaves it to me to say thank you to our incredible panelists. And we're going to be bringing you lots more subject matter, and I think some things that will come from the discussion today as well for other webinars and papers. You can read more about the individual panelists on our website as well and engage with them. And I think a huge thank you to you all for joining us and for engaging with the discussion. It's a real privilege for me personally and for all my colleagues here. This is something that we love doing and we want to be able to do more of, but more importantly, the hope and affecting change is key. And if there's anything we can help you with, please do get in touch. Otherwise, sorry we haven't been able to get to the last couple of questions, but hopefully the next one. So thank you, everyone.